What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Stereotherapy. I'm your host, Lisa, and this is episode 104. Today on the show, I was joined by Anthony Mandelli of Noise Protocol. If you don't know what Noise Protocol is, I have all links below because I think it's really cool when I get someone on here that writes about things because I've tried it. I've done the blog thing, as I mentioned in this episode. It's not for me. I'm not a writer. So when I get to talk with someone that is doing something really cool and I want to push people towards that, I have them on the show, of course. I want to boost people. We dive into the importance of Nirvana, the importance of the New Jersey music scene, Coheed and Cambria, what Noise Protocol is, so many things. And so I don't want to take up any more time in this intro. I want you guys to get into it and listen to this awesome conversation. So here's my conversation with Anthony Mandelli of Noise Protocol. So something we ask everybody is, what are those first memories of falling in love with music? And I know you talked about Nirvana. Like, would you say Nirvana is one of those first memories of falling in love with music?
So there's probably like three big, I guess, like moments that I can remember. The first was my parents had a stereo system that they got, I guess, when they got married. And I don't know if it was just in storage forever or if I just like was old enough to notice it, but as this was like maybe I was like three, four, five, really, really early memory. Suddenly there's this stereo and it's like, oh, this plays loud sounds, and this is
Yeah.
really, really cool. And my mom loved Billy Joel, and
Hmm.
so she would play like the song "Running on Ice" was one that just like always stuck with me. And as I got older, I was just obsessed with her CDs. I didn't really know what they were as a kid, but then I got older and just like claimed them as mine. And so like one year for my birthday, I got a Walkman with headphones, the Billy Joel album, whatever album has Running on Ice on it, and then like Smash Mouth Astro Lounge because that was
Hmm.
like popular that year.
Yeah.
So that was like the big first one was so it was like hearing loud sounds that were just like really interesting. It was Billy Joel, just I guess it was probably the piano, just like really hearing the piano. The second was hearing Nirvana. That like at that point I was like a big music fan. There was a lot of like moments along the way that got me really into it, but hearing like staying up late and listening to the MTV Headbangers Ball, and like before it was called Fuse, it was called Much Music USA,
Hmm.
which was like a video channel, and just watching their metal shows and their like alt rock shows and staying up, and because the In Utero video was just like so captivating.
Hmm.
um and that just like in something clicked there, like the sounds of that album is just like that established a baseline for me of like what like a band should sound like. That's the baseline against that I measure my guitar when I play. Like that's like how I judge production. Now that there's remasters out, I'm really kind of thinking about that. But that was like huge. And so Nirvana was really like my first favorite band, and I spent a lot of time when I was in middle school, collecting their discography and going like at the time, the internet was, I mean, it was around, but I didn't really use it. So this was like 2002 or something. No, yeah, this was like 2002. And just like getting my parents and friends, older siblings to drive us around to all of the like random like CD Rock and Groove was like the big one near me, and making road trips to Vintage Vinyl or like all
Hmm.
these other like record stores all over in like Montclair and like Teaneck and all over New Jersey, to try and hunt down like the like Incesticide, the B-sides album, and like I mean even like Bleach was kind of hard to come by at some point. So just like that was a really big experience, right? It was like my first like favorite band. And then 2003, I want to say, maybe I'm just guessing, maybe it was like 2004. No, it must have been 2003. I didn't go to War Tour that year, but a friend of mine gave me the War Tour compilation CD, and I heard Delirium Trigger by Coheed and Cambria, and my God, the floor
Hmm.
just fell out from under me. That song kicked my ass. It was
Yeah.
amazing. Totally blew me away, and was just, I mean, everything about it, like, it was the like Claudio's vocals were so different, but at the same time, like I kind of was like, oh yeah, I kind of pick up what like this is kind of picking up where I gravitated pretty naturally from like listening to Nirvana and Linkin Park as like my mainstays to you know, like picking up Coheed and getting into them pretty quickly because a lot of my friends at the time were they were into Thursday and like
Hmm.
Senses Fail from the Depth of Dreams had was out, and I'm sure I'm messing up timelines a little bit, but like even like there were a handful of other local bands. My a good friend of mine, his older brother played in a band called Those Who Hung Heroes, and they were sort of like the gateway band that being 3 degrees of separation away from them, like that's how that's how I got introduced to Census Fail and to
Hmm.
Thursday to Madison to Midtown, and got turned on to like Steel Train. Who else? I mean, a lot of the like the bigger like New Brunswick bands,
Yeah.
and such. So yeah, so that was really the third one was like hearing like because Coheed showed me like they kind of were my entry into this whole other well, I really in a way like developed my love for like this like local scene, and then just being literally physically present around when like there's all these like VFWs and Elks Lodges and everything, and just like going to these shows on weekends. It was just like it's just what you did on the weekend. It was just like, oh well, it's Friday night, we go to the Elks Lodge, and it's Saturday we'll go to the VFW, and then Sunday we go to the community center, and just people just played in bands and you went to shows. And I mean, as a kid, I don't know where I got all the like money to go to these things, but I
Yeah,
can't really think
right.
about it.
Yeah, right. When you think of like that's wild to think too, because like for me, Nirvana, it was finding them because you saw like the candlelight vigils everywhere. And I was
Hmm.
like, why do people that don't know him care about Kurt Cobain? Why
Hmm.
is I was
Hmm.
so young? Gosh, had to be like what, 8, 9? I don't even know. I was young when Kurt
Yeah.
passed. And that struck with me. And I was like, oh, my parents have these records. I'm gonna go find them.
Hmm.
And diving into that and diving to who Kurt Cobain was, and even like the social
Right.
issues, he was big on those before it was
Oh
like
yeah.
a thing. And it's like, I was like, oh my gosh, and dove head first. And I think finding them, like you said, like how a band should sound is like they don't have to be perfect. This isn't
Hmm.
perfect, but I love this. And because of
Yeah.
them, I credit them and liking them to like why I gravitated towards like a Thursday or something like that.
Hmm.
Because is Thursday a perfect band? If someone else were to listen to it that doesn't get it, no, they would, whether it was Jeff's vocals or just how
Yeah.
aggressive it is, they're gonna nitpick it. But there's something special about that. And for me, I'm like, if I didn't
Hmm.
find Nirvana, like you said, even those like shows, like Much Music was huge. Like for me,
Hmm. Hmm.
I got to meet Steven of Steven's Untitled Rock Show.
That's
And
amazing.
oh,
Shout out Steven. The
he
best.
literally was like, I'm like, that's who I want to be. I want to be like Steven. And so it was a Fall Out Boy Chicago theater. They filmed, what video was it? I don't remember, but they were filming some special or something at the Chicago theater, and you had to like buy a ticket and everything like that. And he was there because I think it was a Fuse thing, and he was there
Hmm.
filming it. And so I saw him outside, and I was like, oh my God, everyone wants to see Fall Out Boy. I ran to Steven because I was like, I want to meet him and talk to him. And he was so kind. He was just everything anyone thought he was on TV, he was in person. And I remember
Hmm.
telling him, like, hey, I would love to interview bands. I would love to do this and kind of what you do. What advice can you give, some young art school kid? What can you do? And he literally said, he was like, the number one thing is be authentic and be a good listener.
Hmm.
Listen. 9 times out of 10, the people that work in this industry, they don't listen. They ask a question that's on a paper and they want to know what the answer is to the next one and then move along. Be a good listener and keep it about the music. And I was like, okay. And I've carried that since, gosh, what was that, 2008? Maybe before that. I don't know,
Hmm.
2007. It was a long time ago, but he was so kind. And I'm like, yeah, shout out to Steven. He is like bucket list for me to ever get on here somehow because I know he would have stories for just days about like what he's
Hmm.
done and what he's been a part of. And
Right.
things like Fuse, Much Music was huge for us growing up. Like that's where or TRL even you can credit when like the pop punk
Oh
was
yeah.
taking off, right? Like, and I think
Absolutely.
that's just so cool to hear like we have a similar thing with Nirvana, but although different. So like that's cool to see like the
Hmm.
music and that. And Coheed is one of those bands too. Like I think they're so special and not enough people still listen to them. I think they're one of those bands you either love or you don't like. I don't think there's a middle of them. I don't think there's a middle. Maybe there is, but I've immediately fell off really hard in
Hmm.
Coheed. Um, and I've met Claudio. He's so kind. He's so
He's the
nice.
best.
And I think still after all this time, right? Like I think about like these bands like Thursday, Coheed, gosh, Anthony Green, all these people that have been around for so long, they're still just so kind. And I don't know if I
Yeah.
credit that like East Coast. I don't know what it is, but they're just they're the same. Like to me, when I met them years ago at Warped Tour, Buddy Nielsen
Hmm.
even, like you meet him years ago, and then
Yeah.
now he's like, yeah, he's another bucket list forever. Like I'm so
Oh,
jealous that
buddies, yeah.
oh I have you ever gotten to meet Buddy at all?
So like Census Fail is like from around the area like where I grew up. So
Yeah.
they're like hometown heroes. And I mean, I don't even know how many times there's the town that I grew up in, Closter, had a CVS, and there was like a fountain outside of it, and that was just where like everyone hung out. And just
Mm-hmm.
people would just we would congregate in front of the CVS, see who was there, and then you would walk over to the movie theater, which was like, like a 10-minute walk, across town, and see who was there. And then you'd walk to the Burger King, which was like 4 minutes away from the Burger King. And people just like went around and around these three locations. And like,
Yeah.
like Census Fail, like they would be there. And like Jeff from Thursday would be there. Like
Wow.
so I was briefly I used to go to the same church as Jeff. Like, and so we were at this church for a little while, and I saw him there. So I don't know if he was only there once and then I just never saw him, or if we just like, because I only went to that church for a little while. But like these people were like around,
Mm-hmm.
and it was awesome. And being able to now all of a sudden through Instagram of all things,
Yeah.
like being able to reconnect and talk to these people, like these artists, and just like seeing one of my favorite things is Buddy and his kids,
Mm-hmm.
because like I have a kid, and you know every like if you try to find like an exercise for you later is to just try and find some like good tolerable like dad influencers or like accounts
Mm-hmm.
on Instagram, just like and just see what you turn up with, because
Yeah.
it's not so great. And
Oh,
like, and well, when my daughter was born in the middle of lockdown, like straight up, she was born in May 2020, and
yeah.
so everything was locked down. Like it was a pretty crazy experience being in the hospital. We got stuck in the hospital for days, to have to go through this. And at the time, I was working freelance, and my wife had the steady job. So like I was doing what people would consider the like mom stuff, right? I was her
Mm-hmm.
primary caretaker.
Yeah.
And to go like, to spend the day with her, all day with her, and then, work and do, my freelance stuff in at night and when she was napping. And then I'm like, okay, I just need to like decompress. And so I go on
Yeah.
Instagram, and it's just like, man, she's always complaining about dirty diapers, huh? And I'm like, shut up, man. Like,
Yeah.
it was just
Mm-hmm.
like, because the algorithm picked up on the fact that I was a new father, and it just assumed that I was pissed off about it.
Yeah.
And it was like, it was really, really degrading. And of all people, like, Buddy from Census Fail was like, dude, if your kid ate a bowl of cereal and is in a good mood, you are winning. You're doing a great
Mm-hmm.
job. And it
Yes.
just like, it really just has touched me. He's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely amazing. And it's like, it's wild to go from like seeing these bands play in, like VFWs. I'll never forget when I think the video for one of their Census Fail videos, rum is for drinking, I think. The one where they're like on a ship and Buddy's
Yeah.
got like short hair and he dyed it like orange. It
Mm-hmm.
was right around that time. I went to see Census Fail play, and my mom was like, I don't remember if she stayed or whatever, but either way, she saw Buddy's hair and knew that I like hung out with him. And when she picked me up, the first thing she said was, "You are not dyeing your hair," just because she knew like I was like hanging out with him, and like like
Yeah.
what they were doing was like what was cool. So I was like, oh yeah, like I got the same kind of shoes, and like I was like, oh, like Hot Topic, Zoomies, yeah, like these
Yeah.
shirts are cool. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. Oh, no, that's so interesting to bring up too, because not even a parent, but I see. I love Buddy. And when he was honest about it too, right? He was like, you know what? I make these reels because at the time he was like, listen, I have to stay in the algorithm because when I announce a tour, you're not going to see it otherwise. And I loved just how real he was, one, about that, like something
Hmm.
artists face and like what they have to do. But every time he posts about like making the lunches or the dinners they're not
Right.
going to eat or things like that, I'm like, this has to be so relatable to someone, especially like a male fan that is in that same boat to
Yeah.
see him like, hey, I'm back from tour. Okay, now I'm still picking up, dog crap outside or I'm doing this and that. And like him just being so real and authentic like that. And I think, or even when he is open about like his mental health, he's another one,
Hmm.
which is why he's like a bucket list to ever get on, like I think on TikTok or something like that. I've
Hmm.
messaged or
Yeah.
whatever, but I never push. I'm one of those people where people are like, oh, you should do this because I'm like, I'll mention it, but I'm like, I'm not going to push. I'm not going to be like that person to do that. If they want to, they know I'm there. If not,
Right. Because
whatever.
then when it inevitably happens, it's going to be so much better because you didn't push, right?
Yeah. I mean, even talking about New Jersey as someone that's been in it, I touched on it with Travis a little bit, which was really cool to touch on that or anyone I get on here. But for you, what is so special about this scene and for you growing up in it? I know you touched on it a little bit, but
Mm-hmm.
I would love to know because I think me moving here from Illinois, it was like I've always felt like the scene was so just like a sacred
Mm-hmm.
thing, just a cool thing. And so as someone that kind of grew up in it, how was it for you?
I've thought about this like a lot.
Yeah.
Because well, one thing is that I just assumed this was what life was like for everyone, right?
Hmm.
And even the people who I met, like just casually, who quote unquote didn't like music or weren't into music, were just they just had like music knowledge, right? And
Yeah.
it wasn't until I got to college that I met people who were just like music was just not part of their life. And I
Hmm.
was like flabbergasted. I was like, you hear these sounds and
Yeah.
they do nothing to you. You feel nothing. And like I kind part of me is like they just haven't found the right thing for them and they may never, but that's okay.
Yeah.
If you feel fulfilled and music is not part of like that fulfillment, then like more power to you. But it was a long time before I met someone who really like was just like, yeah, no, I get like all of my, my entire life is I feel whole and music is just like is not part of that wholeness. And I was like, all right, right on. That was wild. And and so like I said that just there was so much music around and so I naturally wanted to be part of it. But there's reason I think a reason why it's so special here. And there's a combination of I think two big influences and they both are actually New York City. But there's a reason why there's two. And part of it is because New York City is such a like a cultural melting pot that forever going back decades, you see like a confluence of influences where you get like styles like in like Coney Island had a really rich like jazz community, right? And they were getting a lot of the different sounds coming from like Chicago and Louisiana, and they were playing with those sounds and like up there. And the like the punk scene around CBGBs was thriving, and just like all throughout, like, so New York's got like this really rich history of like even like the discos and the club scenes. And so there's a ton of musical activity happening in New York because of all of the different cultures that are mixing there, and like just because of all the activity. And then on the flip side, New Jersey has been kind of quietly this hotbed for the recording industry,
Hmm.
where, going way back to like, I mean, not that I'm like Edison's biggest fan, but like he built a lot of that early like, recording technology out here, and like a lot of early radio stations and radio towers, they were all out in New Jersey. So you kind of had a combination of musical creativity blossoming in New York City for decades. And on the flip side, this, a combination of like an infrastructure to support it. And so you had a lot of artists who would come to New Jersey to record, or to play radio shows, or there's a long history of artists playing like test sets before big tours, rehearsal gigs, like, in New Jersey, or like secret shows, like all this stuff. And so you have like almost a natural sort of like parallel music scene that developed by nature as like an almost an underground slash shadow of New York's music scene, right? And people
Mhm.
would go to New York, see music, see shows, see artists, bring that back to New Jersey, try to bring that back. And so like there's always been like I guess musical proclivities throughout the state. And then all of a sudden when you have like I mean who's to say what really had like started it, but in like the 70s when you get bands like Television, right, who are starting this like they're really kind of the in many ways the progenitor of that like modern punk sound, right? They took what Iggy Pop was doing and turned it into a little bit, or whatever it was that made them the next thing, made them get bigger, whatever. And that just like permeated into New Jersey. And that was at a time when like a lot of the people who would go on to start the underground scenes, like the New Brunswick underground scene, right, they're influenced by a lot of these bands that took some of the influences from like New York punk or like the DC like post-hardcore scene. And then you get like, Thursday and
Mhm.
that whole scene that grows up, that blossoms in New Brunswick. And so that was just really like, it was a combination of factors that made New Jersey a fertile ground for that. And then I guess New Brunswick with its ease of access to the city, it was again because it was a college, you got people coming from all over the state and taking all of their different musical influences together. And then there's just an abundance of basements, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
you get enough basements and enough kids with amps together, and suddenly like you've got everything you need to emulate all of the cool shit that was going on in New York City. Um, and like it it was pretty easy to replicate because and this is I think a really big thing that's kind of under talked about, or maybe I just don't read about it enough, is that like that prolific amount of basements, or like that amount availability of basements, I said only half as a joke, because the
Yeah.
reason why there was such a rich scene up by me is because every town around me, I live in an area where there's a ton of small towns. And so like if I drive for 20 minutes, I'm going to drive through 6 towns. Every one
Mhm.
of those towns has a veteran of foreign wars, a VFW hall, has an Elks Lodge, and has
Mhm.
like a town center. And those Elks Lodges, it was like $100 to rent for the evening.
Right.
So it was just so accessible that like, I guess when you have enough good music around you and you have enough people with enough free time and you have all the resources, that's just what we did. So it was really like, I guess so to summarize,
Yeah.
what made the scene so special in New Jersey was this really like it was authentic,
Mhm.
right? Because music has always been a big part of New Jersey's DNA, right? Going
Yeah.
back hundreds of years. And so, New Jersey and places like New Jersey, like, Long Island has very, very similar history. And there's a lot of places in the West Coast, and, like even Chicago, that, they have rich musical histories, but they're different, right? Like
Mhm.
they get to this end state where there's like, oh, there's a sonic identity, for this area, but it none of them you grew the same way, like out of the soil it did in New Jersey. That was
Mhm.
like that happened, very it happened very differently. And you know, we think about like a lot of these bands, like like Thursday, Census Fail, Motion City Soundtrack. Motion, not that these are all New Jersey bands, right? I'm just
Yeah.
saying like bands from like
Yeah.
this area, like Taking Back Sunday, or even like Hawthorne Heights, and now I get into like the other bands from that time also. Even like Red Jumpsuit Apparatus is one, or anyway, at the time, like now you'll look at an Instagram page like, like Washed Up Emo or like Elder Emo, like love these pages, like
Yeah.
Emo Night, like any of those pages, and they have like all of these bands and they're all great or whatever. And people are like, yeah, like I love that, that's awesome or whatever. But like I see people posting like, oh my God, like I can't wait to hear Motion City Soundtrack's new song. And I'm like, you made fun of me for listening to that band in high school, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
because you called them emo, right?
Yeah.
And like part of it is the like, oh, I guess you did like this music, you just couldn't own it in high school because your
Yeah.
friends didn't listen to it. So there's part of it is that. But the
Yeah.
other part of it is like I remember like bending over backwards to be like Thursday isn't emo, they're post-hardcore and
Mm-hmm.
like just you didn't want to like you didn't the bands you listened to were not emo. And the
Yeah.
bands you didn't listen to like were emo, and I could never figure out like where did I draw the line, right? Like was it
Yeah.
just like personal preference? And a lot of it was personal preference, but what it really came down to is like, there's I don't like I won't name any names because I don't want to disparage any artists, but there were a lot of artists that, you know, very intelligently for their careers adapted to the style, either from their own decision or through advice of like the labels they were on, and they were popular at the time. I didn't listen to them because they're like, ah, that's an emo band, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And but now like I fully I own the fact that like I love emo music and that I have a billion books on it, right? And well, I mean, like
Mm-hmm.
I always like at the time I was like, no, I like Thursday's not emo, they're post-hardcore. But I'm like, yeah, okay, no, they're like third wave emo. Like I get it,
Yeah.
fine. That's like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, sure, sure.
Yeah.
And it's just that like the difference is the integrity, right? And so it's the bands that, why do you remember My Chemical Romance, but you don't remember, well, I could name like a few of these bands, but again, I'm not going to, because the
Yeah.
point the point is you don't remember them because for them, they hopped on or they tried the emo thing and it didn't work for them. But like
Mm-hmm.
My Chemical Romance, their sound was born out of like, going to those Thursday, those New Brunswick basement
Mm-hmm.
shows and
Yeah.
listening to those bands like Lifetime and Saves the Day and whatever, and like Midtown, like listening to those bands and then like just doing the next thing, right?
Yeah.
And they were artists, they had a degree of artistic integrity that like now when you go back and listen to it, you're like, hell yeah, that like Helena rocks. When
Mm-hmm.
it just like it gives you a completely different perspective on the bands who didn't have the same artistic integrity, and then you're like, oh, this is not like enjoyable to listen to
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
anymore.
There's so many of that, and I think for me, that's why to this day, like Frank Iero is one of my favorite people. I mean, I don't know him personally. I've never met him, but just the way he talks about the New Jersey scene and how that did sculpt him in so many ways, and
Hmm.
how they're still very much New Jersey, no matter where they go,
Hmm.
how big they get. And I love that because I think sometimes bands do, again, I don't want to name names, but they do forget kind of where they came from in a way sometimes. And I love to see a band like My Chem or Thursday preach all the time about the importance of New Jersey and what that's done for them. And even when they come back, when they know it's going to sell out quick at Crossroads, they add
Hmm.
it more. They know and they want to give back to that. And I was like,
Hmm.
for me, again, like growing up in the burbs of Illinois, like we did have basement shows, we did have VFW, churches, things like that. But you really had to know the people, right? It wasn't like necessarily this community. Like you had to know so and so in whatever band
Right,
that was
right,
going to
right.
do that. And they were going to tell you, hey, at this house. And there were so many times I did go, but again, I knew those people. I knew those people playing in those bands. So it was like, it was different. But I felt like from the outsider, I'm like just New Jersey, it was just going on, right? So it's
Hmm.
like more so like that was the difference. And like Chicago had its own thing. Like they were big in their pop punk for a while. Obviously it was like Fall Out Boy, but like then they had their big hardcore. Like there was so much
Yeah.
going on there. But again, you had to really know the people and be in that scene or be invited in almost to attend that stuff. And I just felt like, again, like an outsider of learning about New Jersey scene. It was like, to me, I'm like, it was just this community. And it still
Hmm.
seems that way like it is now today. And even talking to Travis, like it still is that way.
Yeah.
Where like it was not as inviting back home. Like it really wasn't. Like, again, if you knew the people, you were in golden. But if you were just so and so that like just came in there and they didn't know you, I'm not saying like they would look at you weird, but they would be like, well, who are you? Like,
Yeah.
you're not normally here. Um, yeah, that was just really defeating. So like to hear how New Jersey was and how it still is, it's like that's so special. And like
Yeah.
you don't find that everywhere. Like you don't. Like I mean, they'll talk about Boston is another huge one, right? Another
Hmm.
huge scene. But it's like I don't know. Like I love to hear when it does still exist because like
Yeah.
any band I get on here, they're like, yeah, we do. They still do go on and in the basement shows and the little shows. But again, like every time I get a New Jersey band on here, like when I had North Vale on, they were talking about it and like they know, I forget where like North Vale, that's gotta be north.
Northvale is the town next to the town I grew up in.
Okay, so yeah, so they're definitely they were talking of the same stuff.
I have to like look into them and see if I know any of those guys. They're like we're like around the same age and from like
Yeah. No, like
but
that's what's so cool, like talking to
yeah.
them about it when they were like, and they even said too that they felt like maybe they took it for granted a little bit because they didn't realize how special, like that not everybody
Hmm.
has that and growing up in that. And then now, everybody's talking, still talking about the scene. And like even me, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is why I wanted to move here. This is why I wanted to come here. So it's like for them, they felt like they almost didn't appreciate it as much or like
Hmm.
didn't think about it at the time. It was just something you did.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like what you're saying too, like just something you did. And especially too, like I always find it weird when you do talk to people about music and it just they don't think about it in the same
Hmm.
light. Like to me, it's so important. It's so everything. And then when I moved here, it was like, okay, like my fiance's friends, it was like, I mean, they listen to music, but it's like, and not to rank on the Beatles, someone's gonna kill me. But like that's where they stopped, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, I like the Beatles. Okay, well, what else do you like? What do you do around here? What do you do? Like me, I had to find those venues. I had to do all that. And it
Hmm.
was like, it was just weird to me. Like, how can music not mean so much as it does to me? Or
Yeah.
other people like I knew, like how, like again, maybe it's not for you, maybe it's not your thing, but like I'm never gonna be that person that just listen to like
Yeah.
audiobooks. Like not to say
Yeah.
anything against audiobooks, they're great. But it's like
Right, right.
for me, I'm like, I can never be that person. I have to like to go to a show. If I don't go to one
Yeah.
for a while, I feel weird. Like especially lockdown, that felt so weird to not do that for a while. Yeah, it's good to see like it and hear that it's still a thing. Like even Travis posting about he was at a New Brunswick basement show a while ago
Hmm.
with Safe Scene. I was like, see, like that's proof like it does still go on and it is still a thing, like this newer, younger
Hmm.
generation of kids experiencing it. And
Hmm.
I love that. Like, how would you say to you like that or music or maybe even the scene has impacted your mental health?
I mean, it's been nothing but positive, right?
Yeah.
Like for so I like a lot of the bands that we talked about that I grew up listening to, like I would keep going to see them, right? So just using like Coheed and Census Fail as like examples, right? Because sorry, Jeff, but I saw Thursday when like Full Collapse was out, but then I just like never had another chance or like I never caught another Thursday show. I never saw War All
Hmm.
the Time live. I've like so like that and when I saw them just recently at the Waiting show, which was
Yeah.
amazing. I wasn't at they didn't play it the night there the show that I was at, so I still haven't seen
Hmm.
War All the Time
Oh
live. But
man.
so we'll get there. But
Yeah.
but you know like so like Thursday and like Coheed and like Census Fail, you know, like these bands like they kept getting bigger and bigger and like I started getting like priced out of the shows, so I started going to like, you know, less and less shows, but then I also started like, you know, I went to college and stuff and you know like I went to school in Delaware, which there was this venue called the Harmony Grange, which was like the multi-purpose room of a church in Wilmington and like I saw some wild and great shows there. One that comes to mind was The Sleeping. I
Hmm.
saw The Sleeping with PM Today and Tides of Man.
Oh
It was a really
wow.
great show. It was one
Yeah.
of PM Today's like final shows, like one of their
Right.
last ones right before their not their 2014 like last show, but so like but like I didn't really go to, you know, to as many shows, and then after college I was starting my job and like I would still go see Coheed every once in a while because it's my like favorite band, but you know, it
Hmm.
was mostly just like, you know, the bands that I was seeing now or that I like got so big that it just like, you know, it's like a different thing than like going to like a, you know, like a little hall or like a cafe or whatever. So it was just like a different kind of experience, which I didn't realize was kind of turning me off of like the music, like the live music experience. But it was like I didn't realize that like I was disconnecting from the music because the live part was like so essential to me, right? So I didn't know
Hmm.
this was happening. And then like, you know, everything happened, lockdown, I had a kid or whatever, and so it's just like I just really didn't make time for, you know, for music or anything.
Yeah.
And so fast forward to like the last like 2 years, and it's just like, I mean, you know, like things have been, there's just, everyone's got a million things going on in life. And just, I'm struggling, you know, like 2 years ago, just like really, really struggling to find a good outlet, right? Like, I and I'm bouncing around on different insurances because our insurance company keeps changing that we're getting through work, right? So I'm bouncing around, and so I'm in and out of like different therapists. Trying to find a therapist took me over
Hmm.
18 months
Yeah,
to
I mean
find
that.
one,
Yep, I'm with
right?
you. Yep.
And this was all like I had an amazing therapist I worked with years ago, and but then we were out of network, and I'd been out of network from him for years, which was just
Yeah.
really, really unfortunate. And so I finally started like going back to a therapist, and then they just like then our insurance changed again, and it's just like it's and trying to like I've always struggled with like anxiety issues. Like this is a long time thing that I've struggled with, like classic like gifted child syndrome or whatever, like
Hmm.
all throughout college and everything. So like I was seeing a good counselor down in Delaware through the university's psychology center, which was awesome, and he was great, and that was really, really super helpful while I was in school. But anyway, so I finally start going back, to a counselor, and it's just like I'm finally on medication, things looking great, and then all of a sudden it's like supply chain. It's just like can't get medication anymore, can't get appointments with counselors anymore, and it's
Yeah.
just like what do you do, right? All of the support networks totally, totally fell apart. And I just started playing my guitar again, just like a little bit here and there, right? I had like a whole bunch of guitars that I had amassed from when I was in like high school and college, and they were in various states of like like well maintained, and I ended up like trading them all in for like a nice Fender Jaguar that I noodle around on. And I noticed that like the days, or even the weeks when I would like, if I would spend 30 minutes playing my guitar on like a Monday, I would feel just like better until like Wednesday or
Hmm.
Thursday. And I was like, oh, this is what they mean, right? There's this
Yeah.
great analogy that your brain is like a battery, right? If you think about your brain like the battery on your phone, right? Sometimes you turn your phone off, but turning your phone off does not recharge the battery.
Hmm.
Sleep alone does not rest your brain. Like, that's not enough. That's
Yeah.
just turning it off. You have to actually recharge it. And I was just like, this, like a dead battery, this information was just bouncing off of my head until I realized I was like, oh, well, would you look at that? The days or, the times when I spend a little bit of time doing something like, creative, relaxing, it
Yeah.
actually makes me feel better all over the place. And so basically, like, I started, playing my guitar a little bit more, which got me back into reading books about music, which started reconnecting me with like I started listening to music a little bit more deliberately, a little bit more actively, instead of just like, nothing wrong with EDM. I love EDM, but like I listen to a lot of like very like passive, like lo-fi beats and stuff or whatever, or like drum and bass stuff or liquid dubstep when I'm working just as like background music.
Yeah.
And it's just like it's a different type of experience, serves a different purpose or whatever. And I'll say the what really really did it was I read Dan Ozzi's book Sellout, and I was
Hmm.
so touched by Laura Jane Grace's story in
Hmm.
that I got
Yes.
like way back into like into her music. And then
Hmm.
all of a sudden, she's playing at Crossroads. I was like, I have to go to this show, and I
Yeah.
have to get I have her book that she called the Redani and get it signed. I was like, I have to do this. And it was just, it blew me away. Not only was she amazing, but one of the opening bands was this band Teenage Halloween, which if you haven't listened to Teenage Halloween yet, like shout out to their crew. They're absolutely amazing, and they are by far like one of my top three live bands like of all time right now, like to see. They're amazing live. They're one of like the tightest, like best sounding like sets that you'll ever see. They're great. And like I was so impressed by them, I ended up chatting with Eli, their guitar player, for a really long time after the show, and he mentioned that they were opening for another show later that year, which was last summer, and this was the Folly and Paulson show at Crossroads.
Hmm.
And like Paulson is one of those bands that I grew up with, like
Right.
from our area. Paulson was like the band that we saw every weekend. Like, so I was like, oh, are you kidding me? I hadn't seen Paulson in like 20 years, probably.
Right.
Same with Folly. I was like, this was insane. And so the show was sold out, but Eli was like, oh, like we'll put you on the list for that show. And so he was able
Wow.
to, so he did that. And like that moment, like that was when I realized, like, I was like, I missed this. Like, this was so important to me, this seeing music live and discovering bands this way. And being able to come out and like, that show, coming back to that show, like one, Paulson was incredible, two, Folly was incredible, three, Teenage Halloween was incredible, four, I forget who else played, if it was Best of the Worst and Silk Sheets, I think. They were all incredible. Everyone was incredible.
Yeah.
But like since then, I've been really looking at these like local shows, right? And that has really like been a huge it's had such a positive impact on me because I'm reconnecting with music the way that I originally connected it to. I'm finding all of these incredible artists who are, these like I don't want to be derogatory, but they're smaller, they're up and coming, like they're
Mhm.
new bands, they're recent bands, or like bands that some of them have been around for a while, but they're really starting to get momentum now, or even bands who've been around for a while and like don't feel like they have momentum, but you're just still doing your thing, right? Um, it's incredible, and connecting with like Embrace DIY. They do shows at the Madison Arts Center, which is a place right near me, and you can look at, they have a monthly series called Come Original, and
Mhm.
if you look at like just look at the lineups for Embrace DIY's Come Original showcase, and just like every single one of those bands is a 10 out of 10. They're just
Mhm.
outstanding and they're stellar. And like it's it's crazy how like people say like, oh, if you get a good night's sleep and drink enough water and eat like well balanced meals and just kind of like do these things, your body's actually going to feel pretty good. Like, and I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, like you're right. Like that's really, really true. And then the same thing kind of applies for your mind, that it's like when you make the time to prioritize your mental health and just not like there's more that you can do. Like therapy is amazing. I love
Yeah.
going to therapy. I wish I could go back to therapy. I'll figure that out eventually.
Right.
But but like for a long time I was stuck in this rut of just like, if I can't see a therapist, like what can I do? I mean,
Yeah.
you try to even just trying to read stuff online, you try to Google it, and it's just like, well, literally the first two articles say the exact opposite thing, and it's like
Mhm.
I don't know how to validate any of that. Like I don't know how to vet any of that. And
Yeah.
so when you have no other tools and you don't know what to do, just being like, what you can do for your own mental health is just turning your brain to recharging pursuits. And for me, that was like it wasn't just live music, right? It's because it's not just I still go see Coheed, every time or whatever, and like sure the arena shows are great, like yeah, but it's being part of the scene. That's
Mhm.
what it was that recharged me. It wasn't just the music. It's talking to these bands now mostly through Instagram,
Yeah.
instead of smoking cigarettes in front of CVS.
Right.
It's like chatting on Instagram. It's being
Yeah.
part of this scene and meeting people like you and Travis and talking to bands like Nobody Anonymous, who's this incredible like up and comer, that I met, or like
Yeah.
Champ is another one, and like getting to know them, and Thieve, and I could go on and on and on. Like the list is literally endless. So anyway, yeah, what has it done for my mental health? It was the being part of the scene is more than just going to the shows, and for me that's a very recharging activity. And so by doing that, I used to feel guilty about like, oh, I can't take time away from my family or whatever,
Right.
but especially as my daughter gets older, she comes with me to shows now too. Like she
That's
came to the
amazing.
Thursday show and sat on my shoulders and
Mhm.
watched the Thursday show. And Steve Padula gave her a pick. She has it on her bookshelf, one of his guitar picks, right? And she's coming with me to other shows. She's coming with me to see Chuck Reagan do a
Mhm.
solo show too. So,
Oh, wow.
um, right. But the effect is I'm more focused at work. I'm more present, at home. Like I'm
Yeah.
training for a 5K. Like holy crap! Like I've never in my life thought that would be possible. And it
Yeah.
really is just like by using these as like anchors around which I can help organize myself, and like I want to go to a show this weekend, so I should make sure that the laundry's done and the dishes,
Yeah.
like simple
Yeah.
stuff like that. It's all been really, really, really helpful.
Yeah. That's it's so important, I think, to say too, is like, you know, using it and it's that anchor because there are things even for me like when I saw Thursday, what was it, April last year? I think
Hmm.
that's when they did Crossroads. And it was like you said, like as someone who struggles in their anxiety and potentially undiagnosed ADHD, we don't know. We're on that path. We're trying to find that. But like it's like knowing that too, right? And it does help me in my everyday like that, where it's like, all right, Saturday night, I'm going here. The show is at 7, but I'm going to get there earlier because I want the good parking. I want the good parking at
Hmm.
Crossroads. I want to get there. But like things like that, like, and using that of like helping me where like maybe I would veg all day or whether my mental health was struggling. Like even that day, I remember I didn't even want to go to see Thursday because I was just in my mental
Hmm.
health was really bad. But I was like, no, listen, you're going to get off the couch. You're going to do this. You're going to do that. You're going to get in the shower. You're going to do this because you're going to go do this. You need to go do it. And then doing that, like it was just everything. And it's again making that my priority, which again, I know it's easier said than done when they're the bigger shows, right? Because it's like affordability, all that stuff, which
Yeah, yeah.
that's another thing. But there are local shows, and I think people do have to prioritize that because they'll see videos of like these big bands, whether it is Census Fail or even Thursday, they'll see like little shows and they're like, man, I wish I was there. You can be there for someone else right now. You can be in those videos that you
Hmm.
don't know and support that and be part of that. And I think right now, too, whether it's political or just everything, if you find your community, like Travis and I were just talking, your community is so important. And you can find that in the music scene. Like you can
Hmm.
find that. And I think yeah, everything. I'm like, oh, what's Instagram going to let me do a reel? I know now they're giving me 3 minutes now instead of a minute 30, which is awesome. But and even too, like I want to touch on too, obviously being a part of the scene, the importance of it, importance of music. You have noise protocol, which is really,
Hmm.
really cool. And I think
Thank
I
you.
would love to steer people your direction because I give you credit because back in the day, I had a blog and I hated writing. I was not a writer. I'm not a writer for anything. I don't do that. So I love anyone that does it. I would love to send people your way and like kind of give you the floor a little bit right now to like talk about it. Like, what
Oh, thank
is
you.
noise protocol?
Sure. So, Noise Protocol is right now it's mostly like it's a blog slash newsletter. It's based on Substack, Instagram. I'm
Hmm.
on like all the major social platforms. And it's basically my passion project. My in my day-to-day, I work in the crypto and Web3 industry and work on decentralized tech. And I work for a company that was started by um a chief scientist and founder who have been working on, the internet since the 70s and the 80s, right? So they've been working on this stuff a lot longer than anything else that's around. And, a lot of people don't know, a lot of people only know about what they know about crypto or Web3 is just like NFTs, Bitcoin is
Hmm.
boiling the oceans, Sam Bankman-Fried, and FTX, like all the bad stuff, because that's the stuff that got mainstream media attention. And that's really, really unfortunate because the reason, like, on the flip side of that, what people don't hear about is that when the Taliban came back to power in Afghanistan, women aren't allowed to have any assets, so they were withdrawing all their money from their bank accounts and they were buying Bitcoin because it's an asset that can't be seized, right?
Hmm.
And when Navalny, Putin's greatest opposition in Russia, funded his campaign almost, entirely through Bitcoin. And protests around Nigeria, the largest protests in the last like 50 years, I think, were funded largely through Bitcoin. And protesters in Hong Kong, they were relying on Ethereum-based encrypted messaging protocols because everything else is surveilled so heavily by the government there. People in Turkey, in Chile, Argentina, like all around the world, they use, something called stable coins as a way to basically avoid the rapid like devaluation of their local currencies because corrupt governments just print as much money as they want, right? And
Hmm.
so that stuff doesn't really get talked about as much because I guess it's not as interesting. But then, people say, well, like they could have used all these alternatives and stuff, or et cetera, but crypto it's bad for the environment. And I want to dispel that because the majority of the environmental arguments, one, hinge on the fact that most blockchain runs on a computer like I'll basically say it's called proof of work. It's a computer algorithm, and at this point with AI and data centers, people are familiar with the fact that algorithms require a lot of energy to run and stuff. So people kind of get the idea, but Bitcoin is really the only cryptocurrency that uses proof of work anymore. And even then, the majority of the energy that powers the Bitcoin network is one. A lot of it comes from green sources. One, two. A lot of it is off-grid energy that would have been destroyed anyway. It's actually saving grids by taking surplus power that would otherwise have been destroyed. It's helping the Texas power grid, for example, right?
Hmm.
And even outside of that, right? The amount of energy that Bitcoin uses is less than a fraction of something like the United States military industrial complex or the global shipping industry or the Visa network or even Amazon, right? And so
Hmm.
at that point, people's counter argument is usually, well, but those things are useful. And so it's like, oh, well, then this is no longer an argument about the energy is bad. It's no longer an argument about how much energy. It's about I don't like what the energy is being used for. And at
Hmm.
that point, you're saying that the people that Bitcoin is or crypto tech is helping on a day-to-day basis aren't worth it, and I don't buy that, right?
Hmm.
That's not for me. And so, the for me, the chief innovation is that and there's varying degrees of success along this direction, and that's a conversation for another day and another podcast. But like all of that to say is like the chief innovation, right, is this idea of these decentralized services, right? What like how can Bitcoin exist, right? How does Bitcoin have value? Well, the reason money has value, without going into the history of money, because I'm not like an economist or a history of money scholar, but basically, like money and fiat currencies have value because governments say so, or like central banks. There's like an authority that says that this has value and you can use it to do these things with it. And people accept that. And it's like, okay, now I can use it to do stuff.
Yeah.
Basically, it comes down to the fact that you can pay taxes. If you can pay taxes with it, it's money, right? That's someone's gonna absolutely destroy me for that. But either way, like it's like a helpful like mental model.
Yeah.
Either way, right? Bitcoin's chief innovation was being able to mimic some of the features of a centralized entity without that centralized entity actually existing, right? And so, what that translates to when it comes to software is something like you look at YouTube, right?
Hmm.
Right now, YouTube takes in these numbers. I don't know what these exact numbers are, so I'm using illustrative figures just for an example. YouTube makes billions of dollars per year in ad revenue, right? And then you have, excluding Mr. Beast, who is like an order of magnitude more popular than like the next like 10
Yeah.
creators,
Right.
right? You get like creators who have videos that have millions, hundreds of millions, billions of views, and like the amount of money that individual creators make on their on their videos is comparatively small because the amount of money that Google makes or YouTube makes through like advertising revenue, right?
Hmm.
And to a certain degree, like YouTube is a huge piece of software, right? It's expensive to run and operate, but it's still like it generates a ton of revenue. The one of the popular arguments in the decentralized tech space is we want a decentralized alternative to YouTube, because if you don't have to pay, an $80 million bonus to a CEO, that's just more money that can be distributed to all the people who are putting in all that work to drive all that engagement on the platform. And in spirit, this idea is really good, right? The idea of like, okay, well, if we don't have the CEO to pay, all the creators get more. That's great. Most of the attempts to do this have fallen flat on their face because they rely on really, really, really crappy economics, because you can't just rely on like, and then the value of your token going up forever. That's just stupid. It's not sustainable, right? So there's still a lot of work to be done and figuring out how a lot of these mechanisms actually work. But the idea is, when you don't have that, that single person, that Mark Zuckerberg, that Elon Musk, that Jeff
Hmm.
Bezos at the top, like they're just huge value sucks. And like I know people who have founded companies, and I totally understand that when you found a company, you are taking on outsized risk compared to everyone else who works for that company. Totally fair.
Hmm.
But I also recognize that as a human being, there is diminishing returns on the amount of money that you can earn in a year, right? As a single individual human being, like what is the functional difference between $90 million and $100 million to you? That $10 million can, like at a certain point, like, it just doesn't matter to the individual, right?
Hmm.
And that's where like I'm an advocate for these decentralized alternatives. Look at right now, people are super pissed that Meta is like, "Oh, let's take get rid of fact checking." People are looking for these alternatives
Yeah.
and like I'm desperately scrambling together to put together a piece on this because I really want to write something good about it. But like this happened before when Elon bought Twitter and a
Yeah.
bunch of people jumped ship to Mastodon only to get really super surprised when they learned out what federated services are and that it's not the same thing as a totally decentralized platform. They
Right.
were flabbergasted when they found out that the server admins on these Mastodon servers they were joining could go through their DMs and stuff. They didn't
Hmm.
think that was a possibility. And so
Right.
now people are fleeing platforms, they're looking for alternatives. Blue Sky is amazing, by the way. Like
Yeah.
that's a really, really great team. But outside of that, like, but people don't know. They don't know what to do, right?
Yeah.
And even like the best, like I love Blue Sky, and Blue Sky is doing a lot to basically give people all of the benefits of this decentralized tech.
Hmm.
But there's like a potentially more censorship resistant platform called like Farcaster, but I can't in good conscience really recommend Farcaster to people because it's not really easy to set up because it uses a lot of crypto tech and it's just not very user friendly, you
Hmm.
know? And so, like my reason for being in this industry is, in 10 years when my daughter's in high school, I don't want her to have to choose from, like the Amazon social network, the Google social network, or the
Yeah.
Facebook social network, right? Like I don't want her to have to choose from that. One of those alternatives should be a sort of open source decentralized alternative that needs to be just as good. Because right
Right.
now, if you're just like, all right, I just won't use social media anymore, it's going to impact your life because our
Hmm.
lives are super hybrid digital.
Yep.
And so you're forced into one of these ecosystems, right?
Hmm.
Take Amazon as a great example, right? I hate Jeff Bezos, right? Or,
Right.
like what
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
things that he's done, right? Not a big
Right.
fan. And so I'm like, all right, I'm going to shop small. And for so many situations, I try to shop small as much as I can, but what ends
Same.
up happening is I spend more for something that takes longer to arrive
Yeah.
and comes broken, and then there's no protection, no returns, whatever.
Right.
So me as a customer, I have a worse experience and I lose more money. And the thing is, like, I still have my Prime account, right? And
Hmm.
so as an individual, for me, it's like violently exiting a system, and by that I mean like rage quitting. Like
Yeah.
rage quitting Amazon in protest does nothing to Amazon. It does nothing but make my life worse,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, I
But
think a lot of people need to hear that. Like, because right now, that just what you're hearing right now. We need to boycott this, just rage quit this, rage.
but here's like the other thing is like like Spotify is another good example, right? People are
Yeah,
like rage quit Spotify or whatever. And I'm like, no, because if you rage quit Spotify, they're not going to care. Right?
yeah,
They're
yeah.
not going to care, right? And so for me, for one example, right? Like it is much more valuable for me to have my Spotify membership preach against their payment practices
Yeah.
and then also use it as a platform to discover young artists that other people aren't hearing about and then use my platform to boost them and then
Hmm.
people and I also like what's more effective for me, a better form of protest against Spotify than just rage quitting and canceling my account is to educate people on how to better support up and coming artists by
Yeah.
buying their merch at shows,
Hmm.
going to shows and saying who you're there for,
Yeah.
buying their music digitally from Bandcamp. It doesn't matter if you stream it on Spotify in your car, make sure you pay the artist directly for it first, right? Like, because the thing is, you know, it's just like the climate issue where they say, you are using plastic straws, you are part of the climate problem.
Yeah.
No,
Right.
BP is part of the climate problem. Whether I use plastic straws or not is not going to move the needle. Shifting the onus of blame from the corporations to the individual is a delay tactic to like
Hmm.
obscure the fact that companies need to institute much larger changes to impact a lot of these larger problems, right?
Yeah. No, that's even like that's the thing with Spotify. So it's interesting when they came out about how much they gave to the Trump administration.
Mhm.
And a lot of people were upset about that. And I get it. And rightfully so. I get it. But immediately people, whether they're talking to me about it, because admittedly my podcast is on Spotify.
Mhm.
But again, if I jump ship, again, where am I going to that? Or, there's a couple artists that were wanting to jump ship on Spotify. But I think what you said right there is so important. If you use that to say, again, I'm always like Bandcamp Fridays, like do this.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
always, whoever's on my show, I buy a piece of merch and I do that. And I encourage people to, because that's how, because again, like you said, even if I'm not going to say hundreds of thousands of us quit Spotify, I'm not saying that's going to happen because it's not. Again, what is that going to do? That one, that's not going to
Hmm.
happen. But two, it's not going to do anything to them. They're not going to care. They're
Yeah.
going, okay, even like anything going around right now, these boycotts, I'm always, whenever I see them, I'm just like, okay, like that's great for you. But one, also, it's not going to last
Yeah.
because you're gonna, and again, while we say that about Spotify, Apple has things as well. Like it's not just Spotify. I mean,
Right.
I
Right.
think at the end of the day, there's so many of them, and I think using your platform to promote that in ways to support artists in a way because it is, and I think the hardest thing about shows and supporting artists is the expense right now.
Yeah.
But you can still, there are smaller, I don't want to say smaller because I don't want to make them seem in a negative way, but there are ways where you don't have to go to an arena show, right, to support
Yeah.
an artist. And I think so many people, that is a challenge, or they'll go to the
Yeah.
merch booth and it's like $80 and they complain about that. And I understand because I get it. It never was like that. If I got $40 for a hoodie, I was like, this is so expensive. This is so like crazy. And now it's like $80. But there's a lot of reasons why that is now. Like it's a different
Yeah.
time and there's expenses, but it's like I think too, because a lot of people I've seen want to jump ship on
Hmm.
Spotify. And I think that it's a great concept. I don't see that making the impact they want to.
Yeah.
There are ways, like you
It's
just said, to make an
yeah.
impact on an artist.
Yeah. It's really yeah. And it a lot of the it would potentially be a different story, if there were clear and better alternatives, but there aren't. And
No.
so all of these things functioning properly, things like Spotify, things like YouTube, things like Amazon, like all of these massive platforms, they need what's called a network effect to function at that scale. You need that many users to make it worth it, right? Like
Right.
Amazon needs that many, people shopping in order to justify the cost of the planes and the shipping and everything, right?
Right.
And so it's like a very, very simple way to look at it is that the sheer volume of the service like subsidizes the cost in a lot of ways. And it's just like, something like Tidal is great, but Tidal doesn't have all the artists that I'm looking for yet. Maybe it will one day, but it's like,
Right.
in order to replicate the listening that I do on Spotify, in order to be able to discover all these artists, I'd have to split my money, my attention, and my monthly fee over multiple platforms, which again becomes that's too expensive and unsustainable for me.
Hmm.
It's much more like thinking about it on a yearly basis, right? It's much better for me to spend, the whatever $100 a year on Spotify, and then that frees me up to go to all of these different shows. But either way, I would love for there to be a really great decentralized alternative to Spotify. And that's a really, really tough technical question or challenge because there's a lot of things, but like, the short answer is that like that would be great. And I'm in this industry so that way, 5, 10, 15 years from now, we have these viable open source decentralized alternatives to these big platforms so that way
Hmm.
people have better choices, right? But the only way those alternatives get popular is if we start talking now about why they matter, right? And so
Hmm.
that's why I started Noise Protocol, and that's why I wrote that essay, Privacy is Punk, and that's why it's like my motto, and I'm gonna get like t-shirts made and stuff or whatever,
Hmm.
because of like the like cryptocurrencies and like all this stuff, like cryptocurrencies, like the crypto part of cryptocurrency stands for cryptographic, right? That's like encryption and stuff. And the like encryption and this like hacker mentality comes from a group of people called the cypherpunks, not cyber,
Hmm.
Cypher, which is like it's like a cipher, like code breaking. It's all about like encryption and security and privacy and like confidentiality. And so this technology was born out of like that movement. The ideologies of the cypherpunks are the same ideologies of like largely like the punk movement. I'm using punk very broadly here.
Hmm.
And there's not many people in the industry anymore who really are play an active role who embody those ideologies anymore. And there's nobody in the punk, DIY community talking about how to arm yourself with, these decentralized surveillance resistant technologies. And so you've got like underground movements, harm reduction efforts, and
Hmm.
mutual aid efforts getting totally screwed over by like government and private surveillance when the tools to prevent that are readily available. They just need some like help onboarding into that stuff, but no one's talking to them about it. There's a great org called Fight for the Future, and I share a lot of their content. Like they talk a lot about how decentralized technology and like financial privacy all overlap. But it's this idea that people who are in these underground communities or like marginalized communities like are the first ones to fall victim to overreaching surveillance. And a lot of these people, like, when you live your life, in day to day in some sort of like fringe community, and it's unfortunate that people like just being like black in America or like some form of LGBTQ in America puts you in a fringe community that's messed up, right?
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
but like when you're day to day, you can't just like fully be embraced in your community. Like a lot of people find that sense, as you said, find your community. A lot of people find it in music. A lot of
Yeah.
people find it in punk, right? A lot of people
Yeah.
find it in underground spaces. And so I'm trying to represent the good parts of my industry to the people like who really need it, right? And
Yeah.
to say that like there are people who are building tech like resistance technology that care about you and hear you and see you, and not enough people are like talking to them. And that was a shame. So I was like, all right, I'm just going to start writing about stuff. I'm going to write about music that I love, and I'm going to write about issues that are important to me because there's a lot of overlap. And I'm hoping to spread awareness of how these issues intersect, with issues that people, like people in, and I've used the term like underground or punk or whatever, these communities, like, there's tools out there and there's people out there that are doing a lot, to try and like, help and arm and equip you. And I'm trying to be the best like conduit that I can be, between these two worlds. And, I have a lot of ideas and hopes for, for the future and things that I want to do, things that I want to do next and different like partnerships and stuff that are like, they're all kind of like various stages of like practical and attainable based on like how successful the newsletter is and how
Hmm.
successful some other other efforts that I'm working on are. But like it's gotten off to such an overwhelmingly positive start. There's like support from like people like you and from Travis at Safe Scene, and like Josh at Trustkill Records has been
Hmm.
a really really great collaborator. The New Jersey Hardcore page is a really good, the admin of that page is super has been super friendly to me. And like outside of that, every band that I've approached about working together has been super open to it, and like more
Hmm.
so, more so than I thought. And like you said, I think a lot of that comes down to timing. Like I don't rush into asking.
Yeah.
But just even last week, I had an amazing interview with Hotel the Laughing Tree guys who were good friends of mine going back. Their original bassist was my roommate in college, so I got to like hear their songs like from day one, which was super cool. And then
Hmm.
the junior varsity crew as well,
Yeah.
like they were amazing. And Nick, their keyboard and sax player, was just
Hmm.
amazing at giving answers and stuff. And yeah, and I've been talking to J-Wave, the singer from Bayway, and he's just like the smartest, most insightful like guy. He's absolutely amazing, and I'm working on a piece with him. I interviewed him about like his production style and his approach to producing the hardcore bands that he does, and like his responses just absolutely blew me away. So I'm super
Hmm.
excited for that one to come out in a couple weeks when it's done. So by like talking to these people, I'm finding out that like, more artists like the things that I felt were problems with the music industry and problems with, some of the accessibility of some of the tools that I was thinking about. I'm finding that the artists are finding them to be problems too. So that's
Hmm.
good.
Yeah.
That's good, right? I don't
Yeah.
want to like white knight and just assume I know how to fix everything, but like I
Right.
had these suspicions, and talking to people, it's like, yeah, they're feeling the same pain that I sort of suspected was there. And like I think that there's a lot of talented people in my industry who have thought about these problems, but who's just think about it purely from like also from like a business perspective. And I don't think that anyone in my industry has really like one like if you don't grow up in like the scene like I did, you don't see the music scene at like why like my opinion is a music scene is a public good, like a
Hmm.
library,
Yeah.
right? And it should be
Yeah.
supported as such. So I'm approaching this from like this is a public good that should exist. I'm not approaching this from like a business opportunity, right? And so
Hmm.
that I think changes my perspective on it entirely. And and from the like just from talking to the artists and stuff, like it feels like I'm on the right track, and I've got really good support both from people, that coworkers and people in my industry, and from musicians and artists that I've been talking to, and that's just really really encouraging. So yeah, I'm just really trying to help people realize that there's like another side to this industry, but I really don't even like care about that so much as like, when the thing that you need eventually is something that I talk about, like I hope you find out about it from me,
Hmm.
because like people need things and they don't realize it, and they don't want, or they don't like think to look in the industry because it's not obvious where to look, and it's not obvious that you should give the industry a chance because a lot of it is like BS, right? And
Hmm.
I work in the industry day to day, and even just trying to do simple things can be really really complicated for me, so someone who's never done any of this before almost doesn't stand a chance, and I'm just trying to make sure so that way, like, like even simple things, like one of my dreams for this year is at some point this year, I'd love to have published enough resources so that way a band out on the road on tour can just say, you know what, like we want to go on tour, we want to like book these shows or whatever, and then just like throw up like a crypto address and be able to do like a really like fundraise from their fans, because it's really really fast and easy to do that in crypto, right? And there's enough
Hmm.
like to do that, to do crypto stuff, and there's just like there's ways that like like very good, like legal, efficient, like easy to use ways that someone could say like, all right, we're gonna accept donations in the top 10 most popular cryptocurrencies, and then they can use that to like sell that to fund their tours or whatever, right? Like there's so much that can be done, and it just hasn't really happened yet. So yeah, I'm just hoping that this at least like takes, I want to take that first step, and start more of these conversations,
Yeah.
and yeah, so far it's been going really good.
Well, that's all like, oh, so I mean, I know I'm like, gosh, I'm like, I've kept you long enough, but that was really cool to explain that because I think a lot of people do have certain opinions, right? So I think that's really cool. So I would love to send more people your way if you want. I'm gonna have all the links, but tell people where can they find Noise Protocol if they want to check it out. I mean, I know, but in case someone wants to listen, where's the best spot? How can they find you?
Sure. So I'm Noise Protocol on Instagram, and noiseprotocol.bsky.social, and on Threads as well. And on Twitter. Noise
Yeah,
Protocol. Noise Protocol everywhere.
perfect.
If you want to read the stuff, it's noiseprotocol.substack.com, and all the archives are available and you can read all the posts. Um yeah, Instagram, the three big posts, the like sort of the privacy is punk one is, I think, a great place to start, because it kind of
Hmm.
shares like this is sort of the history of the overlap of these ideas. And then Thursday essay was one that a lot of people really liked, on like that talks about like why the basement scene in New Brunswick was like so important, and kind of how it like helped Thursday. So I think that
Yeah.
like those two kind of posts touch on like a lot of the stuff that we talked about.
Yeah. No, oh, for sure. Yeah. So I'll link, I'll see if it'll link me. Let me link those. I'm sure I can. I'll just find those articles too as they start here. And all right, guys, that was my conversation with Anthony. Again, such a great conversation. And I think he touched on so many important things, whether it was the New Jersey music scene, how music shaped him, how going back into a show and Laura Jane Grace played a role in, our music and mental health. And I think that's really cool. You touched on a lot of things, I think, misconceptions about industry stuff. So I think that's really, really great. So I hope you check out Noise Protocol. I have all links below. A fellow member of the New Jersey scene. So I got to push that. I got to do that here. As for our show, we will not be back next week. So if you want, you can catch up on episodes. I have to take a break. Unfortunately, I had to have some cancellations. I don't like to do it, but I had some cancellations due to a new member of our family. I had a nephew born. So I've been kind of tag teaming that. So I had to cancel two people. I felt bad about it. And instead of trying to rush out an episode to cover that up, I'm just going to take a break. And I think a lot of you encourage that. And I appreciate you so much. But yeah, we will be taking a break. And then we will be back the following week with more great conversations. We have so much on the way. And I really appreciate that. If you want to give a follow, subscribe to the show, and leave us a positive rating and review. That goes such a long way, not only for our shows, but shows like ours. All right, guys, I'll see you next time. Bye, guys.